Hello, and thank you for joining me for August's Cyber Awareness Update. This is an awareness tool that CDAC publishes every month and allows us to discuss some of the vulnerabilities and focus areas that have come up over the past 30 days. We'll be discussing some of the top issues and discuss their impacts and their mitigation strategies. What we're discussing is not all-inclusive, and you're encouraged to take a look at some of the vulnerabilities that might impact your organization specifically. We'll be covering 5 major domains: malware, hardware issues, software issues, human-related vulnerabilities, and networks. Let's briefly go over each of these categories as a refresher for those who may not have attended one of our cyber awareness updates in the past. Malware, or malicious software, is code that's intended to damage or disable information systems, steal information, or have other undesirable consequences. For example, viruses or spyware, worms, logic bombs, things like that. Malware is a sort of arms race between the malware companies and the software writers. So it's important to stay on top of it, as it's difficult to do so. Hardware issues are those that affect hardware platforms, where the general users, or sometimes even administrators, have little or no control over it, like firmware or hard-coded programming. With software issues, the administrator or even the user might have a little bit more control. They can disable features or install patches and upgrades in order to mitigate vulnerabilities. Or, in some cases, the affected software needs to be uninstalled. It's important to remember that there's a human involved in every hack or virus. In this section, we'll talk about incidents or vulnerabilities, which are primarily driven by direct human interaction. This could be social engineering attacks or releases by hacker groups or cyber terrorists, whatever's happening now that you may need to be aware of. And finally, network vulnerabilities are those that primarily affect network components and infrastructure. Remember that any technologies or products mentioned in this webinar are only to discuss the relevant vulnerabilities and do not constitute endorsement by the CDSE or by the federal government. First, we'll talk about malicious software. By some estimates, there are 12 million new malware variants identified every month. 143 new pieces of malware was identified by one vendor by the end of 2014. That's 143 million, bringing the total database up to almost 350 million types. New pieces of malware release faster than the antivirus programs can deal with them. It's like an arms race where the defenders can't quite get ahead. So that means that the antivirus alone can't be your only defense against malware. Your users need to understand what's expected of them beyond updating their antivirus software. This means practicing safe browsing habits like not clicking untrusted links or opening attachments where you don't know the source. If you can educate them on the risks, you can make your network much more secure. First, the Angler Exploitation Kit, or AEK. It allows attackers to exploit vulnerabilities without actually understanding how it's happening. Script kiddies, that is, attackers that use pre-existing software scripts for their attacks, but lack the ability to write their own, can use this tool or others like it to automate their attacks. It's a low-effort tool, which means that it expands the number of potential adversaries coming against your network. Support was recently added for a new vulnerability in Internet Explorer 10 and 11, which could allow an attacker to execute arbitrary code, initiate a denial of service, or other undesirable consequences. Patching to the latest version closes that particular vulnerability, but it really highlights just how important patch management is when keeping your system secure. Now let's talk about hardware-related vulnerabilities. This could cover several different types of vulnerabilities depending on the scope of what you're looking at. So it's critical that you look at your networks and your systems from multiple perspectives. It's really kind of hard to remember life before Wi-Fi. Some of us remember a time before we were connected to the internet all the time, much less being able to access it wirelessly from anywhere in your house. Wi-Fi range extenders take a signal and boost it to where it's weak or non-existent. It's how businesses can offer Wi-Fi throughout a large building, or how you can get Wi-Fi in all the rooms of a large house. One of these, the Belkin N300, has a vulnerability that can allow a remote unauthenticated attacker to execute arbitrary code, even without authenticating to the device. Belkin has released an update which closes this vulnerability. For those of you who may not be aware, the system's BIOS is firmware that controls the core functions of your computer. It's what controls the computer when it's first powered on and loads the operating system from memory. It also lets the operating system interact with the computer itself, the keyboard, monitor, printer, and other devices. Certain Dell laptops with BIOS versions before A21 don't properly enforce the locking mechanisms when the computer is being woken up from a sleep state, which can allow an attacker to bypass the security mechanisms. This is a great case for implementing defense in-depth solutions within your environment, where the different security disciplines and countermeasures work together towards a common goal. In this case, exploitation requires local access, so a good physical security program can help you reduce the risk associated with this technical vulnerability. The associated chipset manufacturers have all released updates, so check to see which may apply to you. Now, software definitely deserves its own category, because software is the area that most of your users are familiar with. They use Office applications and communications tools. Even the operating system itself and the browser is software their users are pretty familiar with and use on a daily basis. Software is what the users interact with, and there are frequent vulnerabilities announced or discovered, so of course attackers are going to exploit that whenever they can. Those of you that may have attended previous sessions may start to notice a pattern. Adobe has made an appearance on every one of the cyber awareness update lists, but that's actually a good thing. Because Adobe products are present on such a large number of systems, and because they can't directly interface between the operating system and websites or downloaded files, these products are constantly being probed and tested by hackers looking for vulnerabilities. This means that every time an update is put out to close a vulnerability, it's immediately going to be picked apart to look for new vulnerabilities that can be exploited again. Sure, it can be annoying being constantly prompted to install updates, but there's definitely a good reason why that's important. In this case, new vulnerabilities were discovered even after last month's reporting. In fact, there's been several patches released since then. So it's important that these products be patched and updated as often as possible. Here's another example of software that you can expect to be patched or updated frequently. The web browser is a user's connection to the outside world. It's what they use to browse websites, access web applications, and other functions that can put them in direct contact with a site or a tool controlled by an attacker. In some cases, the user's system can be compromised without them even being aware that it's happened. They didn't install or download anything, that they know of anyways, but their system may have been compromised all the same. In this case, vulnerabilities have been announced for both Firefox and Internet Explorer, which can allow denial of service, execution of arbitrary code, or a loss of sensitive information. The Firefox operating system has been out for a few years now, so it's in preview version 2.2.0, with version 2.1 being the most recent. Versions before 2.2 can allow an attacker to bypass certain security mechanisms, which might allow them to inject arbitrary code, intercept Wi-Fi system messages, corrupt memory, or other attacks. Version 2.2 is the latest preview release, meaning that it's not yet the latest formal release, which again is currently 2.1. This means that it hasn't been completely tested on all systems. That doesn't mean it's not safe to use, especially being a minor version release. But that is something you would consider against your vulnerability management program and your testing progress. Linux is an operating system that's more common than many of us think, largely because of its use in non-workstation environments. For example, it's very popular for server environments, but it's also found on smartphones through Android, smartwatches, embedded devices like routers, and more. But like Windows, Apple's, or Solaris operating systems, it needs to stay patched and updated in order to be secure. The Linux kernel, or the core of the operating system, through version 4.1.3, has a vulnerability that allows local users to cause a denial of service attack. Once again, this highlights the importance of having multiple complementary security disciplines. A local user can initiate this attack. Although that could mean someone from outside the organization, it can also be an authorized user using their own or someone else's credentials to cause damage or impede your mission, something we would call a malicious insider. Of course, we could also call that an insider threat, and all DoD entities and cleared contractors should have a program in place to address it, which is why it's so important to understand these vulnerabilities that may impact your insider threat program. And finally, new vulnerabilities have been announced in Semantic Endpoint Protection Manager, which could allow an attacker to gain administrative privilege, execute SQL code, and read arbitrary files. An update is available to address those vulnerabilities. Now let's move on to the human side. Remember, there's always going to be a human somewhere in the equation. Malware is designed and written by humans. Hacks are initiated by humans. No matter how intelligent the software may be or how automated it may get, there's still always a human in the equation. And they're dedicated, intelligent, and adaptable. The adversary gets a vote in our security program. We have to account for them. Back in May, the IRS announced that 114,000 taxpayer records have been stolen as a result of a successful hacking attempt. Since then, 220,000 additional cases were identified, bringing the total to over 300,000. This figure does not include the 280,000 additional records that hackers tried but failed to get. What's interesting about this case is that the IRS does use multi-step authentication, but the attackers were still able to log in and get the information. This included personally identifiable information like date of birth, social security number, and address, but it also included the answers to security questions like what's your high school mascot. According to the IRS, the answers to those came from social media sites like Facebook or Twitter. In other words, the attacker knew what information they needed to get because the questions were more or less standardized. And because they knew what they were looking for, they were able to search social media until they found it. Of course, those records contain valuable information for data thieves, and some of you may already have been notified that your information may have been compromised. If so, the mitigation strategy is similar to what we discussed last week relative to the OPM breach. Monitor your bank and credit card information for fraudulent activity, be on the lookout for phishing scams, and always think cybersecurity. Finally, we'll discuss network-related vulnerabilities. We rely on our networks, we really do. We use it to collaborate and share information. We need it to access resources and retain data. We need our networks to be available. We need to trust the data on it and keep it secure from prying eyes. That's what they call the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which we now pair with non-repudiation and authentication. For that reason, it's critical that we understand what risks there are to the network and how we can keep it safe. Cisco is the manufacturer of multiple network components, such as those listed here. Multiple serious security vulnerabilities have recently been announced, which could allow an attacker to access the system, conduct remote attacks, upload files, execute scripts, commit a denial of service attack, and more. Many networks out there do use Cisco products, so it's always important that you know what's on your network and how it's configured. Again, that's why it's so important to know what's on your network and to have that management program in place. That way you know what needs to be updated and can better plan for any mission impacts due to the process. Many of your networks may use SolarWinds to monitor and manage the network components. If so, be aware that certain versions of Storage Manager are vulnerable. Even without authenticating the device, attackers may be able to upload and execute scripts, resulting in a denial of service and loss of network visibility. If you have an impacted software version, the hotfix from the vendor will help to secure it. OpenSSH is a free alternative to proprietary SSH solutions and enjoys a significant majority of the market share relative to its competitors. It allows users to encrypt network traffic and is often used for logins or for FTP traffic. Versions through 6.9 have vulnerabilities that may allow an attacker to conduct brute force attacks or to cause denial of service. Version 7.0 was released earlier this month and depreciated the weak and legacy cryptography that was found in previous versions. So now we get to what you can do to defend your systems and your networks from those vulnerabilities and the countless others out there. As a security professional, you have an important role to play in protecting DoD information and assets. In fact, everyone has a role to play. You probably already have subject matter experts in your organization that understand the technology and the security requirements for them. Get to know your IT and your cybersecurity teams. Foster a dialogue that will help ensure that you know exactly what's going on your network. At the same time, they'll be better able to help you navigate changes and prepare for the next threat. You'll end up with a better understanding of the issues that may be a concern, and they'll be able to better communicate what resources they need to properly protect the network. From them, you might also gain an understanding of what's on the network, the hardware and the software that you're using. That's the basis of a change management program, that baseline of hardware and software. With that information, you'll know what vulnerabilities actually do apply to you, and you can react much more quickly. The faster you can react, the less exposure you'll have once the adversary realizes that you're vulnerable. And you can keep up to date about those vulnerabilities through the U.S. Computer Emergency Response Team, or U.S. CERT, which is linked in the sidebar. And finally, use the CDSE resources to keep up to date on emerging vulnerabilities and cybersecurity concepts. Of course, the goal of this presentation is not to get too far into the weeds, but if you have any questions about where to look for vulnerabilities or about this presentation, please feel free to email the cybersecurity team at cybersecurity.training@dss.mil. I want to thank you for joining us for this webinar, and I hope that you found some information that will help you keep your network secure. Take a look at the new RMF curriculum, now available on the CDSE website. It covers each of those steps in detail and gives you a solid understanding of the process and your role in it. Also take a look at the CDSE website for new OBMS job aids and resources, which will help you to use the ODAA business management system a little bit more efficiently. Remember that we'll be releasing new cybersecurity awareness update webinars every month, with a live session coming up in September. Please take advantage of what CDSE has to offer and to learn more about the issues and concerns that may come up. Until then, on behalf of the CDSE, this is Chris Cox. Thanks for watching.